Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to
Lithuania warns Russia will strike in this year. Whoosh. Let's see.
Lithuania has
Strike
had enough
where?
of Russia,
like in
Lithuania, I would think so.
and now it's preparing for war. For years, Lithuania believed NATO would be enough, that being a member of the world's most powerful alliance would keep Russia at bay, that Article 5 would be the ultimate deterrent. But now, everything's changed. The war in Ukraine, Trump's threats to abandon allies, Putin's obsession with rebuilding the Soviet empire, it's all pushed Lithuania to a chilling conclusion. War is coming. President Gitanas
ready?
Nausėda says his country has fought
Well, they're heavily dependent on NATO. If NATO comes help, possibly ready. If they don't, then yeah, it's gonna be Russia.
4 to 5 years to prepare before a Russian invasion becomes a reality. The countdown has started, and Lithuania is racing against the clock. This isn't just a military buildup, it's a national mobilization. Because in Vilnius, no one's asking if Putin will strike, only when. That's the opinion of President Nausėda. He believes Russia is preparing to launch an offensive against a NATO member by 2030, and Lithuania could be first in its path. Proximity alone puts it in danger, but there's more. Lithuania has been one of Ukraine's most committed allies since the start of Putin's full-scale invasion in February 2022. It's already sent over $830 million in aid, a huge commitment from a nation with a 2024 defense budget of just 2.09 billion euros, around $2.25 billion. For Lithuania, helping Ukraine isn't just about solidarity, it's about survival. Ukraine is seen as the first line of defense, but what happens if that line breaks?
I don't know though. If they can take over Ukraine, how they're gonna go for Lithuania? I feel like first they have to conquer Ukraine to go to Lithuania, because finding a two-front war is not really easy, you know. So I don't feel like they will strike this year, unless magically they, I don't know, Trump do something that I get. If they resolve the Ukraine situation somehow, then they just decide, oh yeah, let's take our efforts elsewhere. I don't know.
Nausėda made his warning crystal clear on March 20th. When asked if he believed forecasts that Russia could attack NATO territory by the end of the decade, he didn't hesitate. This is exactly the basic assumption we made in Lithuania. The government's goal is to establish a fully equipped national division and supporting infrastructure by 2030. If the scenario will be like this, we still have about 4 to 5 years. In other words, it's not a question of if Putin will strike, it's when. And Nausėda didn't stop there. He also called for sanctions on Russia to remain in place long-term. With over 21,000 individual sanctions from the West, Russia's economy is under enormous pressure. Nausėda warned that lifting those sanctions prematurely would give Putin the cash he needs to rebuild.
people still have sanctions over towards Russia.
Yeah, it never ended. Well,
Because what I want to understand is the people, like for example, who are foreigners who are living abroad from Russia, who are Russian natives. Are their accounts are also still frozen?
I don't know. Possibly. I think the oligarchs, yeah, definitely. The regular people, I don't know.
Attack sooner, and he's right. Lithuania has no choice but to prepare. According to Global Firepower, or GFP, which ranks 145 nations annually based on the power of their militaries, there is a huge gulf between what Russia brings to the table and Lithuania's military strength. Even though Putin's forces have been depleted by his Ukraine invasion, GFP still ranks Russia as the second strongest nation in the world. Lithuania is a long way behind, coming in at 88 in GFP's rankings. We can see the power difference across the board. Lithuania's military has just 23,000 active personnel, compared to the 1.32 million Russia maintain. Its 104,000 reserves and 14,150 paramilitary forces are impressive, but they pale in comparison to the 2 million reserves and 250,000 paramilitary forces Russia brings to a fight.
That's basically the whole population of Lithuania.
Lithuania fares no better on the equipment front. Its air force only has 9 assets.
But that's
compared to
assuming
the
that only Lithuania is fighting.
Yeah, well, I would think NATO would jump in, yeah, because otherwise, what is NATO for if they don't jump in?
4,292 assets in Russia's air force. Worse yet, most of those Lithuanian assets are transports and helicopters. It has no fighter jets it can use to damage Russia's military. Lithuania also has no tanks, though it at least brings 1,263 armored vehicles to a fight. Unfortunately, that's less than 100 of what Russia has. A 14-vessel-strong navy also isn't going to offer Lithuania much protection if Russia decides to invade via the Baltic Sea. The country's handful of patrol and mine warfare vessels won't be able to do much against a Russian navy that has 83 corvettes, 12 frigates, 10 destroyers, and over 60 submarines. It's a military mismatch if there ever was one, which brings us to a question. Why does Lithuania fear war with Russia? The disparity between the two countries' militaries is only the start. For many in Lithuania, it's enough. They see that Russia is a far stronger nation.
Well, why? Because of history. I mean, nobody wants to go back to what it used to be.
Yeah,
So
for
that's why,
sure.
you know, why they're afraid. Especially if Putin kind of has ideas of reunite what used to be Soviet Union, you know.
Lithuania's citizens have also watched Putin's actions in Ukraine closely, and they believe that he's an expansionist who's planning to pick off Europe's weaker nations one by one to rebuild the Russian Federation and its former Soviet empire. In the past, Lithuania would have felt protected by being under the NATO umbrella. If Russia had attacked a few years ago, the country knew that Article 5 of the NATO Charter would protect it. That article essentially follows the Three Musketeers policy, all for one and one for all. If a NATO nation is attacked by an enemy, all other NATO nations are duty-bound to come to its aid. In other words, if Russia attacked Lithuania, it would receive immediate support from most of Europe and, most importantly, the United States. Many in Lithuania aren't certain that that support is coming in. And the conversation in the country is now focused on what happens if Russia invades. That's according to Gabia Stazukine, who says talk about an upcoming Russian invasion is very common at parties, gatherings, lunch breaks, water cooler talk when speaking to the Kyiv Independent. It's everywhere, she adds. The conversation inevitably turns in the direction of, what are you going to do? Part of the reason for that conversation lies in the actions of US President Donald Trump. Both before and since Trump took office, he's been intermittently hostile toward Europe and its many NATO nations, says the Kyiv Independent. As recently as March 7th, Trump claimed that the US wouldn't defend any NATO members who failed to pay their way. He's referring to nations that don't reach NATO's target of spending 2% of gross domestic product, or GDP,
But that
on
says
defense.
nothing to do with
Lithuania hits
Lithuania.
that target. However, it's such a
What, the Trump?
They
Y-
meet the
They meet the target, yeah, but
so they will be defended, no?
it should, right?
small nation, but many in the country worry whether it will be enough. Would the US come to Lithuania's aid if Russia invaded? Many in Lithuania aren't certain about the answer. With Ignas Zalieckas, a
Well, Lithuania should have given Trump the eggs. Then he would need the eggs, so he would come
Yeah,
to the
ask
defense.
Lithuania for eggs.
Yeah, I saw on Reddit they asked Lithuania for eggs too.
Lithuanian journalist now living in Germany, expressing the general mood. Everybody's thinking that NATO is kind of gone, the journalist says when referring to Lithuanian options following the disastrous White House showdown between Trump
I mean, I can see that point, I guess, because NATO has always been about the US. If you know, NATO without the US is not the same. That's like half of the whole alliance, basically. So
and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on February 28th. However, it's not just uncertainty around NATO that's affecting Lithuania. The country also believes it's in prime position for a Putin-led invasion. Its location plays a huge role in that equation. As the Atlantic Council points out, Lithuania...
yeah, as we said yesterday in our Romania video, it does make sense why Putin would come for Lithuania, though. You see the little Russia right above Poland, above that red above white? That's part of Russia. So there, you could make an argument that, you know, Russia want to reunite those Russians, the big Russia, and kind of want a clear path, whatever. So they just come through the Belarusian side and, you know, take it. So there is an argument to make why Lithuania would be next and not any other country, you know. So there is logic there.
along with the other Baltic nations of Estonia and
Powerful natural detox. Delightful lime taste.
Latvia, is on the eastern frontier of the democratic world. It's the largest of the three Baltic states, and it borders both
What
Belarus
about
and the
this
Russian
on
exclave.
the right of it?
The Belarus?
That's Belarus.
That's Belarus.
Oh.
Yeah, that's basically Russia. Might as well. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Oh.
Of Kaliningrad, both are potential invasion points, as proven by Putin, using Belarus to partially stage his invasion of Ukraine
just the
back in
Russian
February
puppet state.
2022. That location makes Lithuania an obvious target if Putin succeeds in Ukraine and is emboldened to further his expansionist ideas. Making things worse for Lithuania is that, like Ukraine, it's a former Soviet state. The country knows all too well what it means to be the victim of Russian aggression. Up until 1915, the country was under Russian rule during the pre-Soviet era. That changed when it was invaded and occupied by German troops during World War I. When that war ended, Lithuania declared its independence, which was recognized by the Soviet Union in 1920. That recognition didn't last long. Once World War II began in 1939, the Soviet Union started compelling Lithuania to allow Russia to set up military bases on its territory. Clearly unhappy with the results, the Soviet Union invaded the country a year later, absorbing it into the Russian Federation. Over the next half-century, the Soviet regime deported thousands of Lithuanian citizens to Siberia while repressing all resistance. It wasn't until the Soviet Union was on the verge of collapse in 1989 that resistance movements grew
Siberia?
strong enough
Deep
that
in
Lithuania's parliament attempted to declare its sovereignty. That sovereignty was recognized by the Soviet Union in 1991. or an incident in which Russian troops fired on civilians in the Lithuanian city of Vilnius, resulting in 13 people dying and hundreds more being injured. This experience with Russian aggression and Soviet rule matters because Lithuania understands how Putin thinks. In the past, Putin has referred to the former Soviet Union as historical Russia under a different name, according to the Atlantic Council. In other words, Russia's leader believes that the former Soviet territories should fall back under Russian control. Lithuania is one of those territories. It needs to prepare for a fight because it knows that Putin is hell-bent on restoring Russia to what he believes is its true glory. We also can't ignore the fact that Lithuania borders the Suwalki Gap in this equation. This tiny stretch of land, which is often referred to as the most dangerous place on Earth, stretches just 62 miles along the Lithuanian and Polish borders. The problem is that the Suwalki Gap is also sandwiched between Belarus to the east and Kaliningrad to the west, much like Lithuania itself. According to Politico, Western military planners believe that this tiny scrap of territory would be one of Putin's first targets if he ever chose to escalate the Ukraine war and begin a direct confrontation with NATO. Lithuania would be in the direct firing line if that happened. The Suwalki Gap doesn't seem like the most dangerous place on Earth. If you were to visit, you'd find a water park and an indoor snow arena, both harkening back to the days when the location was a popular tourist resort during the Soviet era. You'd also see idyllic farms and rolling fields of buttercups, according to Politico. However, make no mistake, the Suwalki Gap is dangerous. It could be Lithuania's Achilles heel if Russia chooses to invade. By taking that gap first, Putin could essentially box Lithuania's military into their own country, surrounding them on all sides before starting a war of attrition, similar to what we've seen in Ukraine. All of these factors combined.
So yeah, I guess they would cut off the supply.
Wow.
From the supply from the big Europe at least, but from the north it could still come.
That's scary.
Interesting, yeah.
And to form Lithuania's reason to fear Putin. The next question is simple. How is Lithuania preparing for what it sees as an inevitable...
I guess the key is, you can kind of predict predict at least a couple days in advance. You see that they're moving the troops to Belarus and whatnot. So that you can... I would hope NATO would start sending shit to Lithuania at that point too. If they start movement that Russia's starting to push towards Lithuanian border, I would think NATO, would start sending troops to Lithuania too. So, yeah.
Inevitable war with Russia. It's raising military spending. On February 17th, Le Monde published a report in which it highlighted that Lithuania plans to increase its defense spending in stages until it reaches 6% of the country's GDP. Context, that would be 3 times as much as NATO's 2% target and would make Lithuania NATO's biggest military spender in GDP terms. The increase will practically double Lithuania's defense spending, taking it from around $2.5 billion to a little over $5 billion. Furthermore, Lithuania's citizens are getting in on the act, according to Le Monde. They've pledged to support the country's military to the tune of 0.25% of its GDP, says the outlet. Marius Sesnilivicius, who is the Lithuanian president's defense advisor, outlines the reasons why Lithuania is taking this drastic step. We don't think Russia is ready to enter into a military conflict with NATO, he tells Le Monde. But if a peace agreement is reached and international sanctions are lifted, Russia will be able to rebuild its military power. We need to be prepared for this. When asked how Lithuania needs to prepare, the defense advisor added, "For this, we need weapons, ammunition, and NATO troops on our soil." Lithuania may not get the latter, at least until Russia invades, but by bumping up its military spending, it can at least ensure its small military is properly equipped to act as some form of deterrent to Putin.
That makes sense.
Sesnilivicius makes that clear when he says, "Either we decide the budget, or the enemy will decide for us." That's an interesting remark, because it shows us that Lithuania doesn't see Russia as a fellow nation anymore. Putin is the enemy. He is being treated as such. Of course, not all of that rising defense budget is going toward weapons and ammunition.
I think that's been the sentiment for a good minute though, so this is nothing new.
As we mentioned earlier, Lithuania finds itself in a dangerous position between Belarus and Kaliningrad that makes it ripe for a Russian invasion. To counter that threat, the country is doing something very important, fortifying its borders. News of these efforts emerged in February 2024, with a report in LRT claiming that Lithuania is planning to purchase tons of engineering equipment that it will use to strengthen its borders in the coming years. The highlight of this plan is the country's 20 counter-mobility
What's on the
parks.
borders
These
now?
parks will be
I don't know, I've never been. I would think something. There's like a little fence at least, I would think so. Like you see that fence that they show? Yeah, I would think that's what the border looks like.
patches of land that are filled with anti-tank mines. and
Like the EU border, there's nothing. You can travel like to Poland. You can just go. Now with Belarus, it's another country, so I do think there's something on that border.
similar anti-vehicle measures such as Dragon's Teeth that force any incoming force to slow down. Lithuania has already built a pilot version of one of these parks. It was presented in the Vilnius district in September and showcased a combination of the previously mentioned Dragon's Teeth, along with concertina rolls, Czech hedgehogs, and concrete blocks. Building these parks is a smart strategy. Though Russia has far superior naval and aerial firepower, Putin has also demonstrated during the Ukraine war that he's
Maybe
heavily
this is the border. You see this? kind of.
fully reliant on his ground force. As of February 2024, Lithuania planned to spend 1.5% of its defense budget on building these parks and acquiring more engineering equipment it could use to slow the Russian advance. Work was well underway when LRT conducted a follow-up report in August 2024. It pointed out that the fields that line Lithuania's border with Kaliningrad are dotted with World War II-era bunkers, which Lithuania may consider reviving, so they serve as a network of early warning systems for a Russian invasion from its exclave. Several thousand of these bunkers were planned during World War II. Only 300 were built, but the majority of them were on Lithuanian soil and could be filled with weapons and anti-tank munitions to further slow a Russian advance. Lithuania would have been a defender's dream had the fortifications been built in time, claims Polish researcher Kęstutis Jankas. 4 entrenched regions from northwest to southwest. Telsai region had the Baltic Sea on one side.
The Panthers are hitting harder, skating faster, and playing.
Have you ever heard of these bunkers?
Minios and
Yeah, I want to say yes. I don't know if I visited, some military stuff. I don't know if I visited what they're talking about. I don't remember exactly. I was a kid.
Alpes rivers on the other. From there, the landscape is steep, with riverbeds having 20 to 30 meter cliffs, adds the researcher. Lithuania may not be able to use the full planned force of these bunkers to defend its border. However, Lithuania has 300 of them that it can turn against the very nation that built them in the first place. The fact that many of the bunkers, which are generally owned by whoever owns the land on which they're placed, are in the Suwalki Gap, is another boon for Lithuania. It has the chance to fortify the most dangerous place on Earth long before Russia starts its invasion. With some investment, along with permission from the bunkers' owners, these old bunkers could be revived as fighting positions or, in the worst-case scenario, used to shelter fleeing Lithuanian citizens. There are other signs that Lithuania is preparing to fight against Russia. For instance, the country reinstituted compulsory military service in 2015, just a year after Putin's forces annexed the Ukrainian territory of Crimea. Lithuania knew what Russia's president planned even back then. That move means that 4,000 Lithuanians are drafted into the country's military annually, which supplements Lithuania's standing force of 12,000 professional soldiers. Add the 5,000 to 6,000 people who volunteer to train annually, and Lithuania has been expanding its military for almost a decade. It may be able to do more. On March 20th, LRT published a report suggesting that Lithuania is looking toward Finland for lessons on how to further strengthen its forces. Specifically, Lithuanian Defense Minister Dovilė Sakalin plans to visit Finland to learn more about the country's mobilization efforts. Sakalin will familiarize here with the reserve system of the Finnish defense forces. The majority of Finnish men, aged between 18 and 60, are active service members or part of the auxiliary reserve, reads a
60?
statement from Lithuania's defense ministry. That system allows
I mean, listen, if the war comes, 60 you still gotta do your part, I
60?
guess.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, it's no longer because you gotta keep in mind it's a small country. There isn't that many. You don't.
60.
Yeah, 60. Yeah.
allows Finland to train 22,000 recruits annually, including 1,000 women, the ministry. Those who are trained become members of Finland's reserve force for the next decade, assuming they don't enter the active military. Lithuania is looking toward this model because it creates the potential for the country to make more soldiers. It may not push its active military beyond the 24,000 active members it has now. However, it'll build a strong army of reserves upon which Lithuania can call at a moment's notice if Russia ever invades. Finally, January 2025 saw Lithuania revive its 1st Mechanized Division. That division will be equipped with aerial defense weapons and artillery, in addition to engineering and reconnaissance units. It's essentially a combination of Lithuania's Iron Wolf and Griffin land brigades, with some reserve soldiers added for good measure. The division's revival is important because it demonstrates how Lithuania is working alongside Poland to reinforce its defenses. The country's Chief of Defense, General Raimundas Vaksnoras, says, "The re-establishment of the 1st Division, dating back to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, marks a quality milestone in the Lithuanian armed forces. We are expanding our deterrence and victory capacities." That sums up what Lithuania is doing across the board. It believes an invasion by Russia is imminent, whether that invasion is part of a wider war against NATO
Wow.
or a localized fight designed to bring Lithuania under Putin's
That is so stressful.
I think the title was a little clickbaity, though. I don't think.
They say by 2030.
Yeah, but this says this year, which is in the next 9 months or so. It's a little more to kind of get you to click.
proto-Soviet yoke is irrelevant. Lithuania needs to be prepared.
Yeah, this
It's
is-
now spending more on its defense than it ever was before, with plans to increase that spending over the next 5 years. Lithuania is fortifying its borders, making it harder for Russian forces to invade from
Yeah, I think the idea of the video was to kind of just about how Lithuania is prepping for the war, but they dramatized it
The
with
title. I need to see the comments.
that is happening this year. So this year is a little like because how I see it happening, as I said, if Trump somehow agrees to peace, then Russia regroups.
Yeah.
It would take, I feel, Russia a little bit more than a year to recoup and rebuild whatever they lost. So I don't think it's this year, but it's possible soon. As a master sergeant in the Royal Danish Army, I'm confident saying that we can be in the Baltics in less than 10 hours when called. Love Lithuania from Canada. NATO brothers forever. Love Lithuania from Poland. Finland being in NATO should make Putin think twice. There was little war in 1939 that Finns haven't forgotten. I think Poland would come to the aid of Lithuania. I mean, I would hope the whole Europe would come to the aid, but
Yeah.
you got to prepare for the worst. Prepare for the worst, pray for the best. Lithuania is not alone. First, they're part of NATO. Second, all countries bordering Russia will immediately support Lithuania. That's the thing, though. If you're bordering Russia, I don't know if you can support Lithuania. You have to be worried about your own border because if it happened to Lithuania, it can happen to you. So I would
Mm.
think not the countries bordering Russia, but the countries that have nothing to do with Russia should help Lithuania. Uh, yeah. Third, Ukraine will be the new war training country, showing how to defeat Russia and make them pay a hideous price for the aggression. Russia has a no-win situation fighting Europe and its free peoples. We Romanians are preparing as well and will be there in case something happens. Much love for Lithuania. Mm.
Mm. Wow, so everyone's like pretty much bracing themselves. So this like
I,
inevitable.
they've been bracing
Oh,
themselves for the past like what 3 years now. Because
oh, that's
no,
very sad.
yeah, nobody thought this would happen. The whole Ukraine
Mm.
conflict would happen, but it did. So
Mm.
yeah,
Well, guys, don't forget to share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord. And as always, 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 share as much kindness as possible.